So there really is some hard and fast rules when it comes to properly locating your cabinet handles, but there's also a bunch of subtle little tips and tricks that can actually make a world of difference. So we're going to go through all that in regards to drawers and doors, and by the end of it, you're going to be an expert. So let's start off talking about drawers. Now, in terms of the horizontal location for your handles or knobs, there's really only two different variations. The first is the most common, and the one that I recommend going with is just centering everything, whether it be a knob or a handle. That just looks the best in my opinion. And then the other variation is when you start to get to a wider drawer, say like a 30 or a 36. And then in that case, a lot of designers are going to opt to go to a 2-knob or a 2-handle system just to kind of fill up that space a little more. I don't really recommend this because what ends up happening is whenever you're pulling out a drawer and then you're going to pull on one handle or the other, you're never going to use both at the same time. What ends up happening is you're pulling and the drawer will start racking and it's not going to pull out as smoothly. And over time, if you keep using the same handle to pull it out, which you probably will, you're going to start breaking your hardware. Now, in terms of your vertical spacing, there's 3 options there. They're all decent, but there's definitely a hierarchy, and I have my favorite and my least favorite. So I'll start off with my least favorite vertical placement for drawers. So the worst location, in my opinion, is mounting it in the top style of the drawers. Now, it does vary slightly if you have a slab drawer face, but let's talk about the styles. Now this kind of looks nice and it makes it more functional to grab onto the lower drawers. But the problem here is that on this top rail, the top rail is usually smaller on these drawer faces as well than your lower drawers. And what ends up happening here now is now with your countertop overhang, it's hard to get your hand in there. So you're gonna have to come from below and it's just a little bit awkward. And then the worst thing that can happen with this tight little spot up here is getting your finger jammed in there or closing the drawer and like smacking your fingers. It's really annoying. I really hate this location. If you do have a slab type of drawer, I would recommend, this is a nice look, so you could come down kind of 2 inches, 2 inches, 2 inches, and then that way you just put the handle down here and you can access it from the top and you're not going to jam your fingers and smash them onto the countertop. So then the second option that we have for the vertical placement is just the good old centering. And there's nothing wrong with this. Probably 80% of people end up just doing this option here. It does make your lower handle quite low, and you can definitely save a couple of inches by bringing it up a little bit. And now the only thing that I will throw out here with centering the knobs, if you want to take it to the next level, what you need to do is on these bottom 2 drawers, you want to cheat this one up about 1/8 of an inch and this location up about 1/4 of an inch off the exact center. What that does is just from your viewing angle of up high, looking down at the drawers, if you do that, it's going to look like they are actually centered. And then the final location, and my favorite, and what I would do on my own home if I were to install the knobs or handles, is centering on the top and then the middle and the bottom one, keeping that same spacing on the knob. What that does is it brings the handles up about 2.5 to 3 inches, making them easier to open from a high position. And it actually just adds a little variation to the look. It doesn't actually look that great with these knobs currently the way it is, I think because you can see these holes as well. But with like a nice pull, it actually looks really sharp to do it this way. And then the one thing you have to worry about this type of a setup here is when you're laying this out, keep in mind that on the top drawer, if you have a shaker style door, the rail is going to be smaller than the rail below. So you can't just, if you're using a jig, set it up to this location and then pop the jig down here and drill it in the same location. You have to adjust it for these bottom 2 rails. And you want to just keep that same space. So this is 1.25 inches down off this top rail. So you want to come 1.25 inches down off this top rail. So let's move on to cabinet doors. And again, there is really only 3 locations that you can put knobs and handles, with some slight variations that we're going to cover as we go along. And stick around to the end. I'm going to give you the #1 mistake that people make when they're putting knobs on their cabinet doors. You don't want to miss it. It can be a real soul crusher. I've actually seen people break down and cry after making this mistake. So let's get into it. So the first location, it's a bit of an oddball location. It's for people that want to be just slightly different. It can be a little bit more of a modern look. Is to put the handle in some kind of a mid door or somewhere in this area. Now, as an installer or even as a homeowner, this can be a real pain in the ass for a couple of reasons. Is because whenever a customer wants to put one of these handles kind of mid-door, I always have to point out the fact that when you drop down to the base cabinets, now all of a sudden you're gonna have to bend over to open up your door. Whereas if you stick to this kind of a location, then you're just gonna be able to reach down and grab your bottom door quite a bit easier. So then the next step here is, well, maybe we wanna put the handle kind of somewhere in this location. So now, yeah, you're definitely gaining a little better on the bottom cabinets, but then you start running into problems. Once you start running into some different sized doors, like over the stove or microwave, or even over the fridge cabinet over here, and then you go to kind of floating this thing around on the bottom and the top door, all of a sudden, every single door becomes an issue and a new problem to solve. And if you're indecisive, and worse, if your client's indecisive, it's an absolute freaking nightmare. I've had jobs with this particular issue that have been delayed hours, days, and even up to a week in a particular instance. So overall, I don't hate this look. It can actually look pretty decent in some circumstances in kind of a modern kitchen or whatever. And just another tip here, if you do have just a panel door that doesn't have these styles, you definitely want to keep the handles slightly closer together, maybe like kind of 1.5 1.25 off this edge, just so that it looks like a pair. If you start moving these handles apart kind of over this way here, on a slab door, it can look a little weird. It just doesn't look like they're together. So I definitely recommend, even with a slab door, keep them kind of 1.25 to 1.5 off the edge of the door. So the second position here is just the horizontal look. Now this is a look that I actually really like. The feng shui with your drawers going horizontal and then all the doors going horizontal. You also have the benefit of this being on the top rail on the lower cabinet, so it's easier to use. Simply quick here is you just want to center this on the door, center it on the bottom style. If you're working with a slab door, you can afford to put this kind of in a variety of distances off the bottom. I'd probably look at kind of the 1.5 to 2 inch. That way, if you have a bottom door that is right up tight to the countertop, you probably want to be about 1.75 inches minimum. Otherwise, it's going to be hard to get to that handle from the top without banging your knuckles on the countertop. So keep that in mind. But there is a couple of things that can absolutely burn down your house and cause a ton of grief here with this type of a position. So let's go over those. So the first real big error that you can make horizontal handle wise is just having the wrong size handles. You have to be a little more careful in terms of your handle sizes. You want to pick a handle that has a variety of sizes, anywhere from kind of 3 inch, maybe all the way up to 12 inch, depending on how big your drawers are. That's a good tip as well for the drawers, is just size your handles accordingly. It's usually not going to work that just one size handle is going to fit everywhere. And especially if you get into horizontal on the doors, you're going to run into some narrow doors and you're going to need to get a smaller handle. And then the second thing that is just an absolute nightmare. I've lived through this a couple times before I was smart enough to see this coming down the road. And that is, anytime you're up against like a fridge gable or you're in a neo-angle situation, when you're putting on the handles horizontal, this is a decent handle here. It's only 1 inch thick and it's a smaller handle, but what ends up happening, you get yourself a little bit of a handle that sticks out further. This one's 1.75 inches. And especially if you have a bit of a bigger handle, you pop that thing on there horizontal, go to open up your door. Yeah. I remember I did one kitchen where the handles that they had, the door was like at a 45 before it was hitting the fridge cable. And nobody's happy about that. So if you're gonna go horizontal, you have to do a little bit of planning. If you're in the design phase, I recommend putting like a at least a 1-inch filler up against this gable. That way your door is going to have some space to accommodate for the handle. And then the other thing, if you have kind of a neo-angle cabinet type situation here, same problem can happen. If your handle sticks out too far, all of a sudden this door is going to be bumping into that. If you're going horizontal, it can be a really nice look. It's something I would think about doing it in my own kitchen, but you just have to be a little careful with the pre-planning. Make sure you get the right size handles. And if you're in the design phase, make sure you design around a horizontal installation so you don't end up with, nobody wants to live with a cabinet that only opens up this far, and every time you open it up, it's damaging the other part of your cabinet. So watch out for that. In the last position here, if a customer asks me, where should I put my handles? Where do most people put their handles? This is it right here. It looks great. It's highly functional top and bottom cabinets. It's a one location solution for almost all of your doors. This is where I put my handles upstairs in my bathroom on the base cabinets. It makes it easier to reach down and grab them. And it's really hard to go wrong with this setup. There's a couple little subtle things here that I'll go over. So basically you want to just line up the handle with this bottom rail right at this point here. There's a couple things you can do. You can line up this bottom edge with it like there. I like to kind of personally split the difference and go right in the midpoint of your handle here. To me, that just looks kind of the most balanced for whatever reason. You can't really go wrong. If you do line up the bottom edge here, that looks good as well. This looks decent as well, is just line up the bulk of this handle with the middle of this bottom rail, and that just looks like that. That looks great as well. The only thing you have to be careful there is if you get a handle with an overhang and you do that, now all of a sudden you don't want to be anywhere past the half point of this bottom rail. And now the only real mistake that you can make with this type of a setup is with knobs. This can actually look really bad. If you're going to put knobs on, I recommend lining up the middle of the knob right with this top edge here of the bottom rail. That looks great. That's how all these cabinets were laid out. The mistake that people make, and I've seen it and I've done it myself, is centering it on this bottom rail, centering it on the side stile. You pop that on there, you get your locations, you drill it all out, and then you put that on. And it, for whatever reason, because of the perspective and the viewing angle, it looks like it's way too far out towards the outside edge, and it does not look like it's centered. What you want to do is, if you want that kind of a look, you want to just cheat it towards the inside corner about 3/16 of an inch. And for whatever reason, it's not centered, but it looks centered that way. Even if you have a slab door, and you want to locate the handles on the slab door, the knobs on the slab door, don't go 1.5 and then 1.5 up on the top. I would go kind of 1.5, 1.25 this way, and then I would come up 2 inches. It just, if you try to do the same on the side and the bottom, because your viewing angle is always from above, it's never going to look like it's the same if you do that for whatever reason. So avoid that with your installation of knobs for sure. And now that you know how to perfectly locate your handles and you want to get them installed, the best way to do that is to check out this video right over here. Getting it perhaps 12 to 14. I can't say 14. So the worst location in my opinion. So let's go ahead and talk about doors. Wilbert, do you have to be licking so loudly over there? A little break here. My dog is drinking out of his bowl.